Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Not sure when you're watching this. To Around the Campfire. We're here at Northwoods with Caitlin Gerke, and we are going to be going through today a conversation about UX, usability, identifying UX issues. Say hi, Caitlin.
Hello, good morning or afternoon,
Whatever it is.
whatever it is.
Let's start with the little bit of the boring stuff, and then we'll jump back into some examples and maybe tell some hair-raising stories about UX issues that you have found and solved along the way in all your journey here at Northwoods. What is UX? What does that even do? The letters don't match the experience. So what does it stand for?
Yeah, so UX is user experience. And
Isn't it experience start with an E?
It sure does, but UE doesn't sound as fun. So UX is basically just the idea of anything that might contribute to the experience your user has on your website, your app, your tool that you're using. So it's all about both doing research to make sure that whatever the experience that the user has is good for them, that they can do what they need to do, that they can find what they need to find, that they, aren't struggling with anything. So doing that research to make sure that everything is working. And if things aren't working, figuring out how to redesign it, how to restructure it, how to add content, take away content, do whatever we need to do to make that experience better for them in the long run.
Better for people. So let me start with a hard question right away, which is that you might have a website that you've built and developed, and maybe you're the designer who's been in charge of it. How do you even know that something is wrong? It could be better. So this is a dilemma, right? You're looking at the site and I'm getting clicks and people are connecting and they're filling in my contact us page and I'm getting 5 a week. How would you know that there's a problem with the website?
Yeah, so there's a few things. The most obvious ones are if any of those things you said aren't happening. So a big thing that we'll see is people will come to us saying, I have this contact form on my site. I want people to be filling out this contact form and I'm not getting a lot of submissions, or the submissions I'm getting are all junk and they aren't people we want them to be. That's a very clear sign that something's wrong. Other times is if you're, another one that we see a lot is like if a support team and they're getting a lot of questions about the site. People are saying, I'm calling support because I can't find this on the site.
Can't find.
Yeah, that's a big one. The other thing, so it'll be stuff like that. It'll be something will come up with your support, with your site. You'll ideally have goals in mind for your site that you want to be happening and making sure those are happening. But really the biggest thing to make sure that, you're keeping an eye on things and that you're making things right is to make sure that you have the data set up to know. Because I think there are definitely times where, we'll get approached to redesign a website and it'll be because the site's, been up for 5-6 years. It's looking a little old. The main focus is let's make it look nicer. And we'll go in and we'll do some research and we'll see, there's actually like these problems. People aren't actually finding things. We need to do more than just a facelift. We need to sort of build some new rooms and we need to, kind of restructure this holistically, not just from a design perspective. And here's all the reasons why and what we're seeing. So I think the biggest danger that you can have with UX is making sure that you've got the data and that you've got everything set up to kind of raise those alarm bells. Because that's a big issue that we'll see is people don't even know sometimes that there's an issue until it's been going on for a really long time.
So the answer then maybe the short answer to my question is you might think it's okay, but you don't know because you don't have the data.
It could be.
Yeah, I mean, and or it could be working perfectly fine, and don't touch it, don't break it.
Right.
That could be true also. But let's dive a little bit into the data idea. What do you do on a site? What are some of the techniques? I know heat maps is one of the things that you've talked about before. Focus groups, kind of things. Describe those things and some of the other ones that you do to gather this data that would tell you that there's a problem or an opportunity for improvement.
Yeah, I think the basic thing that we look at in every case is Google Analytics or whatever your analytics source of choice is.
GA, also known as GA.
GA. So Google Analytics, it's a great tool. It's free. So it's something where if you don't have that set up on your site, just get it running. It's a nice baseline data.
How long does it take to get that set up correctly?
I mean, to get it set up at a base level, we're talking less like 10 minutes. There's always things that you can optimize with it. We've got a team here who is great at, making sure that you're tracking every little thing and every little conversion is tracked and you're monitoring it. But
so you can
takes
plop
very
it
little
in.
time.
Yeah, I've seen people plop in GA in the 10-minute version of it, but it's not gathering useful. It's not on every page. You've added new pages and integrate it. And or like you said, you're not focusing on some of the conversions where you can add extra stuff in GA that would track whether somebody's clicked on which button exactly did they click on the page.
Yes.
So these are all things. Yes.
That stuff will always help too. But I think the biggest red flag we see is if you aren't tracking anything at all. That's when we're like, okay, there's probably things going on here that we just don't even know about.
So you put GA onto the page. And what are some of the metrics that you look at inside of GA when you're doing your evaluation?
Yeah. So at a basic level, we're looking at things like what pages are people going to? How long are they spending on those pages? Time on, where they're going next. So like kind of the path they're taking through the site, even to see a big sign for me is if they're backtracking a lot. So if I see someone going in a couple levels and then going back to the homepage, I'm thinking, why'd they have to go back to the homepage? And is it happening a lot? Why didn't the site funnel them to where they needed to go? So that'll be things we'll look at. But really, because there's so much in GA is tracking all sorts of stuff if you've got it set up correctly on your site. GA is really, I kind of think of it as sort of the detective work stage where I'm just going to look at a whole bunch of stuff and see if anything flags as something that seems not what I would expect it to be. So site speed, look at, are pages loading really slowly? What devices are they showing up on? Are they mostly using mobile phones? I mean, how does their experience change if they're on a desktop computer versus a phone? Are they doing different things? Are they interacting with the site differently? Because that might be a sign that the UX, there's something in there. Really, it is something that we come back to as we're looking at some of these other sources that I'm talking about in a minute. If we're looking at heat maps, talking to people, it's something that as I'm getting data from those sources, I'm always going to be going back to GA to see does that fix with what that person told me? Is that what I see is happening on the site? Can I learn anything more about that experience? Yeah. So it's really the baseline for everything.
Yeah. Fair enough. And you're describing a Sherlock Holmes sort of solution in taking all of the clues, like you mentioned, site speed and engagement, backtracking, all of these in context. Will give you a clue to form up a big picture. So you're taking in a lot of data inside the state. So you start with GA. It gives you ideas as to where the problems might be. Then do you actually I assume you're going and looking at the pages themselves while you're looking at the GA.
Oh yeah. I honestly, before I even get to GA, I'm looking at the site. So just because I've been doing this for long enough and I can usually spot, I wonder if there's anything going on this page, or I wonder if users are able to find this, and just kind of forging my own sort of hypothesis of what might be going on if we want to be really scientific about it, and then tying it back to the data always. Because I think the thing about UX that sort of perplexes people sometimes is that there's plenty of best practices out there, but depending on your site and your audience, sometimes rules are meant to be broken. And if it's working and the data shows it's working, I don't care what the best practice is. Let's just do what's working. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'll start too.
Yeah. Let me, this might be an inch controversial, but in artificial intelligence, what you do at this moment in time?
Not at this moment in time. I think it's a great tool for helping to identify problems, especially in, there's different tools out there that can run scans of sites and identify that first step that I'm taking. The problem right now, and not to say this couldn't get there in the future, but the problem right now is that we're talking a lot about GA, but really these next steps and combining all of this together is sort of the big thing. So in addition to this, I'm talking to the website owners and I'm hearing what their perspective is. I'm learning about their business. What we'll talk about in a second is I'm running focus groups. I'm talking to the users of the site. We're running heat maps. And what AI can't do yet is combine all of that together. It can point out the best practices and it can point out some of the little potential issues, but it's not great at breaking the rules. Just understandably, and looking at that full big picture because we're getting data from so many places. It just isn't equipped to do that yet.
And it might be a little while. There's some really deep reasoning involved in what you're doing. So I think it's important because AI is all around us. And we keep hearing it's going to replace all of our jobs, which, I think there are certain things that we do that are routine or whatever redundant that could get replaced where it can do a single thread or a couple threads together. But I would agree with you that AI is a long ways. I'd even go so far as it's a long ways from being able to synthesize all of this data, put it all in context, understand the big picture. We've got a ways to go. We'll see. And when that day comes where it can, we have a Caitlin replacement, and hopefully we all own an island in the Bahamas somewhere.
That'd be great.
All right. So we gathered a bunch of data. You've analyzed it. You've looked at certain factors. You're now synthesizing this stuff.
Yeah.
We talked about GA. What are some other data gathering methods? You mentioned focus groups.
Focus groups. Yeah. Talking to people and really beyond focus groups. So we'll do focus groups of, we usually say 8 or less people, and we just talk to them about their experience on the site. Usually they're people that are from the same audience. So I think a school is a great way to break this down. We work a lot with universities. So if we're talking to a university and doing focus groups, we might have a staff focus group. We might have a students focus group. We might have a community member collaborator. We might have an alumni one. Maybe we'll have multiple student ones. And what we do is we bring up the site and we say, what do you do on the site? What do you like about it? What do you struggle with? And we're really that impartial third party to get an idea of what their experience is like on the site. It's tricky though, because while we are that impartial third party, people are usually more accurate with us than they might be internally, because they know that, they're not going to hurt our feelings. It's all anonymized, things like that. We always do have to go back to that raw data that we're gathering as well, because as much as we love human input, people do lie, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And so it's really important to always go back to the data and see if it matches with what people are telling us, and double checking things and making sure we're actually understanding the full picture. I always like to say that they cover 2 different areas. So the raw data, like the GA data and stuff like that, is telling us what people are doing. And we know that's correct. We know that that is completely factual.
Yes.
What
right.
it can't tell us is why they're going there. Why did that person go to that page and then go back to the homepage?
Yeah. You can see the behavior without the why. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where I can go to a focus group, and if I have that background as I'm seeing people go back and forth a lot, I can say, well, do you ever feel like you have to restart your navigation journey, or do you ever find yourself going back to the homepage? Yeah. And sometimes they'll say, yeah, and this is why. And then it's much better at me at narrowing down, okay, this is the problem. Let's find a solution.
You can drill in. I went to this page and I just couldn't find what I was looking for. Or it's so cluttered, so I gave up, and now I want to go and use the search box instead.
Correct.
So, yeah. You've had a couple of case studies or focus groups where you've kind of had some health where we had doctors and patients, right?
Yes.
And what did you learn in that experience?
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite examples of talking to the audience and narrowing that down. So we had a group where it was an association of doctors, and their website was serving multiple purposes. They had to have content on the site for those doctors, and they needed to make sure that those doctors could find things like meetings and things like that. But they also had educational material for those doctors' patients. So they wanted the doctors to be able to send pages of really easily to understand information about these conditions that their patients were being diagnosed with, which is very fair. And the problem was, though, that they were doing it all in one place. So patients were getting sent a page, and then they were trying to click around, but they were getting stuff for the doctors. The doctors who were just there for meetings and more technical information were getting onto this really plainly written factual information, which wasn't helpful for them. And everything was very cluttered. So we had these doctors and patients. Let me dive in to right here. So these were the things that we were hearing from them. So we did do focus groups. We also sent out surveys. So this was another way we get data from users, is we'll send out a survey and ask people to fill it out and send it back. It's a way to get a lot more opinions and a much quicker time frame versus just sitting down and talking. Just another way of getting that data. And they had very different needs on the site. So the doctors were looking at meetings, looking at journals. The patients were looking to find a doctor sometimes. They wanted help with treatment. They wanted information. And so what we did is we really broke down that site and looked at the content and noticed that there wasn't a lot of overlap in what the doctors needed and what the patients needed. And so what that actually led us to doing was creating 2 completely different websites.
Sites altogether. So 2 different URLs?
Yeah.
Okay.
2 different URLs. I think they're both under the same main domain. It allowed us to really focus the navigation on the needs of that user. So the doctor site had things like the meetings, the education that's focused on their needs, their research in their journal, learning about being a member of this organization, things like that. Whereas the patient's navigation was very much focused on the conditions they were being diagnosed with, what the treatment was like. So they had a lot of great resources about, like, you're going to have this treatment done, here's what to expect, and things like that. So it was very focused on their needs.
So a very different sitemap I can see here.
Yep.
How much overlap is there between these 2 sites?
Basically none. There is a link in the top, and that's it. And you can even see here that the design of it was completely different. So we wanted the doctor site, which is the blue one on the side here, to be very more professional focused, more, more kind of tidied up. Where the patient one, you see a lot more of like these sort of more animated looking icons and things like that to make it feel much more approachable.
Yeah.
So there's basically no overlap at all. And in addition, we found a lot of clutter. We found a lot of unneeded pages, a lot of very small pages.
Okay.
So I believe I have this next.
A little
We
bit
actually were able to
icing on the cake here, right?
icing on the cake. We cut it down. So we cut it down from almost 1,800 pages to under 200, which allows it to be much more focused. Every page has a purpose, and
Did you delete
users aren't
pages
jumping
here?
around.
Or delete or
We did
consolidate
everything.
pages?
Everything. So we deleted some that were just unnecessary. We consolidated. So some pages that were sort of small, maybe had like a paragraph of text on it. We combined multiple together to have one sort of larger purpose. And in some cases, there was duplicate content. So we, got rid of the duplicates and made it one page.
I was on a site last night around and I was looking for some detailed information and it had a paragraph of text on it, as you just referenced. And I wanted a link, I wanted an image, I didn't know the other stuff. And I was so frustrated and I imagine this is a common experience when you, as a user of sites, we all know when we land on a site that really frustrates us because we worked hard to get to this page and then there's nothing there. I was doing some product shopping information and then trying to get some specs and, video and a price and where to buy and none of that. It was just a one sentence description of the product. And I went, throwing things at the screen. So you are able to move beyond the frustration in these focus groups and the data analytics, and the surveys that you do. You're able to find and pull to the surface that frustration that these users are having with the site and then come up from your vast encyclopedia of knowledge to be able to say, I know how we could fix this. Consolidate pages, put more things together, rearrange the sitemaps, separate the content into two distinct audiences. Like you said, there's no overlap between the patients and the doctors on your doctor site there. So that the content is now clean and filtered. So you're only seeing stuff that's reasonably relevant to who you are and what your missions likely are. So,
we kind of say that we're the voice of the person using the site. So I think it's very easy when you're a webmaster for a site to get very focused into the needs of you as a business and the needs of your company on the site. Yeah. But in reality, that's second. Really, the primary need is who's coming to the site and what do they need from this site? How do they need this page? How do we make it so that they don't have situations like you just had where you felt you'd done this work to get to this page and then your needs weren't met? Yep. So that's really what our goal is let's find where there's problems. Let's also make sure that we know what those users really need so that we can make sure that that page is structured and that, what your site is doing actually meets their needs. Because what I always like to tell my clients is that if you aren't meeting your users' needs, they're not going to help do what you need them to do on your site either. So we got to put the users first and use data to back that up so that we also know that we're doing what's right and we're not wasting time on something that's just hearsay.
There's lots of little factors between a good site and an excellent site.
Oh, yeah.
It's a world of subtlety and intuition and best practices and skill. And if it's all data driven with some solid whys, are we doing this sort of thing that all makes sense in the end? You come to a really well-designed site and you don't appreciate how much work might have gone into it. The thinking and the design work, the expertise that's involved over there. Sometimes people get lucky though, right?
They do.
All right. So we've done a bunch of research and you have now gathered data, focus groups and surveys and information and analytics and intuition going through the site yourself, speaking to internal users. One of the things in my journey too is we go into a company and they'll say, oh, just talk to the sales guys. They'll tell you how to fix the site. They know what's wrong. I've heard that many a time from people who did not want to engage in doing some more of the hard work. Just talk to the sales guys. What are some of the flaws we love sales guys. They're great. But what are some of the flaws of talking to the sales guys to get all your feedback and information on what needs to be fixed?
Well, they're only one audience. So I think that they're a good group to have included, but they're only going to be looking at things from their particular set of needs. So they're looking at things from what they've heard from people in the sales process, which is a good thing to make sure we include, make sure that, if they're getting commonly asked questions, that we make sure those questions are answered. However, it's probably not the only audience coming to your website. Right. So we want to make sure that, current customers' needs are also being met to make sure that that's another thing. The other thing is that just like any audience, and just like I was saying before, with people lie, whether they mean to or not,
Yeah.
It's coming through a filter. So they're talking to this person with this one, mindset in mind. And they're looking at like, how do I make the sale? What can I answer to help them make the sale?
Yeah.
When it might not be the only things that they need at that moment to actually get to the sale. So really, the more often we can go to the source and go to the actual person that the salesperson guy is reaching out to, make sure that we're actually meeting their needs and not like needs that are sort of filtered through the sales perspective, is going to always make sure that, we're getting things to the point in the best way possible.
We don't want to the salesperson that they are both the doctor and the patient, and they can speak to audiences. They're the doctor in this, I guess, in this metaphor.
They are.
in this analogy. And so I've also, have you heard the sales guys know that they want to make the sale, and so they would prefer that there be less information on the website so that you could give them a call so they could actually connect with you. And that doesn't apply to all industries, but have you heard that one?
Oh yeah. This is the eternal battle, I feel like, with a lot of our manufacturing clients. I just actually had this happen. I was working with a manufacturer, and we did talk to a lot of the different levels. We were able to talk to end users, we talked to the sales team within the company, and we talked to actually some of their distributors even. So we met them at different levels, and they all said different things. The end user said, give me as much information as humanly possible on the site so I can make a final decision myself. The distributor said, tell them absolutely nothing, just give them a link to my site instead. Right, and then the sales guy said, give them a little bit, but make sure they reach out to either the distributor or to us to actually get the final information.
Yeah.
And what's tough is, we see it from every angle. Obviously, we're trying to meet the end user's needs, but we also understand the business needs behind it. And that if you give everything out there, there's also the concern that like they're also seeing that. And like, there might be stuff you want to keep proprietary. And, we're always going to lean on, we're going to give you the recommendation that best fits the end user's needs, because really they're the ones that are using the site.
Yeah.
But we're also very much used to, okay, let's find a compromise point. Maybe these are the things that are the most important to the end user. Maybe we don't give them this one particular thing unless they reach out, or like maybe we give them enough. Price is the big one.
Yeah.
And then also sometimes like schematics is the other big thing, or like diagrams. We sometimes will gatekeep. One thing that I know we've done to kind of give both sides is we'll gate it. So they can still get it immediately. They don't have to reach out to someone, but they have to give an email address before they can actually download it. So then the sales guys know who's downloading these files. Yeah. So again, we're very used to that. And that's, I feel like, the constant battle. But, finding ways to still meet the user's needs while addressing those business concerns is probably the most important thing.
So we've talked about users' needs and data. And one more thing I wanted to jump into is actually looking at where do people click, which is heat maps, right? So you had another example. Maybe let's just kind of walk through that one with the gift giving, that you could pop that one up.
Yes, that one is fun. So this is actually done through not heat maps this time. This is done through user testing. So,
yes.
Yeah, user testing is a really fun thing that we've been doing more of. That we basically get a group of users, usually between 5 to 8 users, through an online tool. We personally use Playbook UX. There's a bunch of them out there. And what we do is we get users that meet a certain demographic to complete tasks on a website. So, if we know that we want users to find a certain PDF or click a certain link, we ask them to complete that task, and then we get a video of them completing the task to see how they do it or what they would do. So this is one of my favorite examples of getting some really good information that really could help us improve the UX. So in this example, this was a page that we were analyzing, and the client, the owner of this page, wanted users to click on this View My Guide right here.
Right down there in the bottom.
Yeah, right there in the bottom. And obviously there's a lot going on this page. So they're like, are people actually finding this? Are people seeing that? So we made it really simple. We brought people to this page as part of our user test, and we said, okay, you read through this page. Where would you click to learn more? What would be the next thing that you did? Where would you click? And we, what they did. Now, sometimes they mentioned more than one thing. So this was 5 users, but there's not going to add up to 5. But most of them said they'd click the watch to learn more, which makes a lot of sense. It's sort of the main call to action.
First one they see, right?
What was that?
It's the first one they see. So it's in the flow of where their eyes might scan, right? It's the first call to action on the page.
Exactly. Some people brought up that they would click and they'd email this person that's in next steps, which also makes a lot of sense. Some people said that they would click on one of these links. Someone said they'd click this resource, and not a single person even talked about that. Start today, find my guide. So it was a really clear example for us of, okay, if someone isn't seeing that, and that's what we want people to do, how do we fix it? So what this is sort of like we're saying, kind of wrapping up that data gathering. These are all different ways that we can identify the problems, and then we go into fixing them. But for us, this was a clear problem of, okay, people aren't clicking here. They are clicking here. Let's see what we can do to this page to, better optimize it so that they are seeing that more often.
Sure. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking intuitively, and this is where when one slows down, some of these things become an inch more obvious. If I was on this page and I had a big box that said next steps, where you got 3 mentions over there, you would that would be a definitive end state. This is where what do I do next? And if start today is really in conflict with next steps, those are 2 kind of next steps. Why not integrate both of those together? I'm not sure. There's probably a million ways to fix this, but fact is that you have all these calls to action, all kind of competing for your attention. This is like a room full of children all screaming, look at me, look at me. And it's like none of them are, especially the one that's back in the corner is never going to get seen. Yeah. So that's my non-technical way of describing what's going on this page.
These are things that we look for is, when we talk about like optimizing a page for what a user needs, it's all about, if they come to this page, we want them to learn this thing and then do this next. And we try and keep it to maybe 1 or 2 things that they might do next, because it makes it a lot easier to make those things stand out and be highlighted. So then we can optimize and restructure the page to best meet those needs.
Is it a rule to not have more than 1 call to action on a page, or what's the rule there?
I would say it's a best practice, but rules are sometimes meant to be broken depending on the site and the user. Yeah, just depends on the site. But I would say we usually aim for 1 main call to action. Sometimes we might recommend more depending on the site.
Yeah. Okay. It's one example. You had another example about listening to a podcast too.
Yes. I love this one. I actually
show that one too.
Yeah. And I actually can talk to this one without even bringing up a slide because this is very easy to do. So this was during the same medical example, and they have a podcast on their site that they want people to watch. And so just during my focus groups, as I'm talking to these doctors who are members of this, I said, "Oh, do you listen to the podcast?" I just kind of threw it in as part of our conversation. And by far the main response is, "Well, what podcast?
Right.
There's a podcast?" And it turns out they didn't even know it was on the site. So in our redesign, in our restructuring of the site, we put that a lot more prominently. We put a little description of what it was, because it also didn't say podcast in the name. It was just like a generic title for what they call the podcast. And since that site has been live, it's been live for over a year now, that link to the podcast has gotten over 1,000 clicks.
There you go.
So
went from 0 to
it.
now.
0 to a whole bunch more.
Okay.
So
arrangement, what naming conventions, etc. You've gone through the action, looking at the layout of the page through feedback, user testing, that people are not clicking on stuff that you would prefer as a website owner, that they would be clicking on. So they've identified for you the goals of the site and all your gathering. And then you look at the page and say, how often are these goals being met? Which is your conversions. That's the other word for it, right? And so how well are the conversions working? And you're able to identify stuff. And I assume you're seeing examples where everything's working great too, where not a lot to fix.
Yeah, let me actually show. This is more of an example of a site we'd already worked on. And I always think this is great. I love it when we can go back and do some more data gathering to see how things are working. So this is an example of a site that we worked on. We kind of restructured this page and we added a filter in. So we wanted to see if people were using that filter. Was that filter useful? As well as if they were seeing the links on these cards that we had added.
So this is a heat map. This is a heat map here?
Yes. So we ran, this is heat map testing. This is one of the last things that we haven't really touched on. And this is basically showing hot and cold zones of interaction. So in this case, we're looking at clicks. And anything that burns red hot is getting a lot of interaction. Anything that's gray or even like a light blue means it's getting very little. So in this case, red hot is lots of clicks. And what you can see is these are kind of buttons at the bottom of these cards. And the most often clicked thing on the page is the button at the top card. So that's great. People are seeing it. The other big areas that are getting clicked are the filters. So they're seeing the filters. They're using the filters. We saw this on the same site when we did some more heat map testing on some buttons that we had optimized. So we wanted to make sure people were seeing kind of the main click points on the page, the main calls to action. Kind of going back to that previous example where they weren't seeing the calls to action, we want to make sure that wasn't happening. And we can see the areas that were burning red hot were the calls to action buttons that we wanted them to see.
Yeah.
So perfectly, what we had hoped they would see, what we'd hoped they'd find, and kind of proves that that's the right approach in terms of design for the page, which is great.
Yeah, I'm aware that some of these sites, you get thousands of visitors, that sites like, who has a whole department that does this all day long, they they get millions of views, per hour. And they're able to make subtle changes to the pages and then watch to see what works and what didn't work. And they can actually see a drop off in the engagement on a page, but just by changing the color, by moving stuff around. And some of that, you study this research, obviously, and gathered some of these best practices from people that are able to run. Most of our clients, and frankly, most vendors don't work with people that have millions of visitors per hour coming in, where you can't run a usability test for an hour and get really valid data back. So how often do you have to gather data for these heat maps to work?
So heat maps, it depends on the traffic to the site, like you were just saying, but I would say an average site, a month or two of data will get you started. I always say the best way to do it is to just have it running and check in on it every once in a while, making sure that, things are as you expect them to be, kind of having a report of things that you're always checking on that go along with your goals for Google Analytics and things like that. And just keeping an eye on it on at least a monthly basis, or if you can't on a monthly basis, every couple months, to make sure that there isn't any red flags. Because usually what will happen is that it isn't like an overnight, everything is terrible. It's like, oh, suddenly, I'm seeing less people clicking on that button. Oh, now even less people click on that button. So that might be a sign that you can catch it before it becomes just not useful to you anymore. Sure. So keeping an eye on a regular basis is going to be your best bet.
Well, proactively on top of your site sounds like something everyone should do. Probably not too many people do.
Correct.
Yeah, there's looking at the GA, looking at the heat maps, looking at site traffic, and then measuring calls to actions. All things that we should do on the proactive. Yeah. Let's touch on navigation just a little bit. So we've talked about layout. We haven't been exhaustive at all. There's probably hundreds of things we could talk about on how you would lay out a page, but navigation is probably one of the main ways that people engage with the site. They come to the site, they look at your nav, and you have gone through some testing, did it for a big government entity down in North Carolina.
Yes.
And they tell us a little bit about that experience, what you learned from the navigation stuff.
So this is another example of we use user testing pretty heavily for this. And let me actually bring this up here. So they had a really interesting situation with their navigation, which is that, like a lot of government entities, they have lots of departments, and the departments have very distinct needs. So they had a sort of main site navigation that was very broad. And then once you got into a department, that department had their own navigation. So, for example, we can see the main navigation is things like I want to, residents, business, etc. Whereas if we go into this emergency services pages, it's things like services and special operations, administration, education, that's focused on that department alone. They're almost like a collection of mini websites. And we wanted to see if people understood that they could kind of jump between departments, even when they were on this page, by going back up to the county menu that was in the top corner. You can see it a little bit right here, which is a very unique approach, but we thought would serve the needs of their audiences and help people define what they're looking for. Because typically, once someone's in a department, most of the time they aren't leaving. They're going there to complete a specific task. They're going to that department. They're completing that task. They're leaving the site. But we wanted to make sure if they wanted to get out, they could. So we ran that user testing again, just like we asked them to complete tasks on the site, these anonymous users. And we asked them for a couple things. One, we asked them to go from the homepage to a department, which should be easy, was our thought. And then we asked them to go from a department to another department, really testing to see, can they find the button that's in the top left corner? Can they switch between departments? And we did 3 rounds to make sure that we really kind of got a full picture of this. And what we found is that after round 1, they didn't really see it. In round 1, we had it as a blue box and it just said county menu. And this is an actual quote from a user in that test that said, "This is tricky. I'm looking for all the listings in the county, but I don't see it." Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, you're not seeing it. What can we do? Like, how do we fix this?
Yeah.
So In round 2, we kept it saying county menu, but we made it purple.
Made it purple.
So it's a little design change. I was working with our UX designer who is very used to finding little tweaks like that to make things stand out. But you can see it blends in a lot less with the bar that it's on.
So it's popping a little bit more?
It popping a little bit more. It just grabs the attention a little bit more. Talk a little bit about like a squint test where you squint your eyes and you see what are the things that stand out on the page. That's one way you can see if there's a color that pops out and things that grab your attention a little bit more. And what we found is people found it eventually. They did see the button, but this text that said county menu wasn't intuitive to what it did. So they would say, it took me a little bit to navigate with departments. Once I realized that it wasn't with the department's navigation, it was up with that button, it was pretty easy. So often what would happen is they would see this county menu drop down, but they wouldn't click it because they didn't think that's what it would do. So we made it really blunt for the last round, and we kept it purple, but we changed it to switch departments.
There you go.
And then immediately everybody found it. It was like, I assume I just click switch departments. Yep, that was pretty simple. So it was a good example of little tiny tweaks, and testing it and seeing what works and what doesn't is a great way to help optimize the user experience on that site.
Yeah.
Because it was really, we went from a blue button that said county menu to a purple button that said switch departments. And it went from nobody finding it to everybody finding it immediately.
Yeah.
So cool example.
It's interesting that the county menu is a description of the IT. It's like an internal way of this is it's a thing, where switch departments is an action. It's like,
correct.
What do you want them to do? So it's closer to the finish line. A county menu is a 40-yard field goal, and switch department is on the 1-yard line where you just got to push it into the end zone here.
Yeah. You want to make it so they don't have to think as much as possible. And
right. You
get very low attention span so from users on a page. So make it as obvious and easy as possible. And that's what we did.
And you've also worked, I think in the same deck, you had an example of mega menus.
Yes. I think on the next slide. This is another thing that we tested actually with that same client. This is when you open up that menu. And one thing that we tested and we very quickly changed after round 1 was that we originally started with this sort of icon and stripe at the top here that would bring them back to the home page, which looks nice, but people didn't know what it did. So afterwards, we literally just took that out and made home a button instead, and everybody knew how to get back to the home page. So again, there's sometimes things where we play around with design, and even if something looks really nice, if it isn't functional, then we need to reevaluate it. And in this case, we took away some of the design to make sure that it was functional, make sure they could know how to use it.
So in this case, you're doing repeated user testing.
Yeah.
How long does it take to go through an iteration of user testing to find these flaws and opportunities for improvement? How long does that take?
Yeah, so depending on ignoring the time it takes to write the questions and set it up and all that stuff, which could take a little bit of time. But really, if we kind of know what we're testing, we've got that all in there. At any time, anything from a couple of hours to a couple of days is pretty average. Sometimes it takes longer to gather those anonymous users if it's a really specific audience. But in this case, we were looking at basically anyone in North Carolina, which is a pretty wide group. So it wasn't too hard to narrow it down to who we're looking for.
And you had a very big audience with that. And that's going to be the bigger the company, potentially the bigger the audience that you can use to do that. Does it get tricky when it's a much smaller niche manufacturer to find an audience that's valid?
Yes. We've had situations where it's taken weeks to get the audience that we need, but oftentimes it's pretty quick. So it just depends on how specific we want to make it. I can say for the other example I gave where we were looking at the different cards on the page, that one took about a week. But we were narrowing it down to a specific state and things like were they parents and things like that, like certain characteristics of that audience, and just took a little bit longer. Yeah.
I do love examples, and I know in this deck, I've been peeking ahead. You have one more example of department listing pages.
Yes. Let me bring that up. This is the exact same project and same test. This is another one of my favorites. So this is a great example of, again, looking at the design of a page, looking at the structure, and making sure it fits the user's needs. So this is the list of departments for that county, and it was just listed alphabetically on this page. So they have to scroll down alphabetically to the department they were looking for. The question is, what if they don't know the exact name of the department?
No.
So for me, what I knew was that the department might be tricky in this regard because it's called public health, not just health.
Not just health, right?
So it's under P, not H. So I did a little bit of a trick here. I asked the users in this task to find the health department, not because they wouldn't necessarily know what it was called.
Yep.
And they couldn't find it right away.
Yep.
It took some searching. And there was some frustration of these users who were completing this task because they couldn't easily find it. So what this led us to recommend was adding a search bar to this page. So if they don't know the exact name of the department, they can just type in health and public health will pop up because it's still in description. So just a good example of using data to identify those problems. And then, the step we haven't had time to talk about today, we won't be able to touch on, but, how do we fix that then? And thinking through the different iterations and ways to fix it, which in this case, our recommendation was a search bar.
Excellent conversation. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, insights, and experience, the long knowledge base, the encyclopedia of knowledge that you have. It's amazing. And again, I want to iterate that AI is not ready to do your job. So
No.
everything is safe for now. Yeah, there's so much. Being a good doctor diagnosing, you're able to look at the X-rays per se and the MRIs and put it all together and be able to come up with a good diagnosis. So I think you're the Dr. House of Northwoods.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, for anybody that knows the reference, but there it is. All right. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks.